so just a heads up, I got a head cold at the moment, so I wasn't able to work on this video as much as I wanted to. But even though I do feel groggy-headed, I can still try to push this video out there. As Dark Souls 2 was my first Souls game. I used to watch a lot of gameplay of Dark Souls and Demon Souls. The combat mechanics of the game looked great, so I decided to get a Dark Souls game, and Dark Souls 2 is what I got. Dark Souls 2 was still new when I got it. So when I started playing the game, I died a lot, I beat enemies, bosses, and leveled up a lot. Now, of course, Dark Souls can be a very difficult game, and I love the feeling of improving at Souls games. And I made it to the Shaded Woods before I got a PlayStation 4. And of course, when I tried putting my PlayStation 3 discs in the PS4, it wasn't backwards compatible, so needless to say, I couldn't play it on there. And since I tossed the PS3 when I got a PS4 because I thought the PS4 would be backwards compatible, I wasn't able to play Dark Souls 2 until much later. Now that I've played other Souls games like Elden Ring, there's a lot I want to say about revisiting Dark Souls 2. Starting with Majula. It's my favorite hub in the entirety of the Souls series. It has absolutely comforting atmosphere, and the scenery is just beautiful. And like all hubs, this is where you upgrade your gear, level up, see new characters, and such. And this is where the journey starts. Dark Souls 2 has a variety of weapons and armor, and there's also the durability system. I usually hold a lot of weapons just in case one of them breaks while I'm adventuring. The rest of the levels have good visual design, but as for the platforming design, it can be both good and bad. And speaking of the good and bad, Dark Souls 2 has a lot of good and bad things to it, and I can see why people like and dislike Dark Souls 2. Like the adaptability system. The rolling in Dark Souls 2 is very different from the other Dark Souls games. It wasn't weight-based like them, it was based on agility. Agility determined how long you would be invincible when rolling. When starting off, you don't have a lot of agility, and that actually affects it a lot because when you try to roll, you could actually get hit mid-roll, and you would have to level up adaptability to level up your agility in order for your rolls to be, well, normal. I can see why people dislike that. I personally dislike it too, because that is just way off from how Dark Souls rolling is normally. It was a change that just shouldn't have been made. And then there are life gems. Life gems are notorious for being overpowered later on into the game. Overall, eventually life gems will just take the place of Estus flasks, and Estus flasks will just be secondary healing later on. Because at some point you could just buy life gems and spam them. It completely destroyed strategic healing in the game. In Dark Souls, Estus flasks were meant to be used strategically. You were supposed to use them to heal in a tactical manner. You weren't supposed to just spam heal whenever. And that's exactly how life gems worked in this game. Unlike other Dark Souls, when you die in Dark Souls 2, you go hollow and your health gets lowered. Another issue in the game would be the hollowing. It's one of the worst changes to the game as a whole. Many people disliked it as well. I disliked it too. Again, another change that shouldn't have been made. Overall, I mean, losing your souls should be enough. And, yeah. You have to use human effigies to remove the hollowing effect. And there was a ring that reduces the health reduction made by the hollowing effect, so there's that too. But again, it's just a change that shouldn't have been made. Another thing people say about the game is that the combat can feel really sluggish at times, and that's true. It does feel sluggish sometimes. Not super sluggish, but definitely sluggish, and it's a very valid criticism people give the game. It really doesn't help that the platform design of the game is very, very off. There are levels that feel alright, and then there are levels that when you're fighting something, you could just die due to the platforming. The platform design in the game can be really broken at times, and when it gets bad like that, it can feel like the worst thing. Unlike Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3 and Dark Souls 2, after beating a boss, you could still be invaded. Now this is a good addition in Dark Souls 2. The game has a lot more endgame content because of this. So after beating the game, you still have invasions to look forward to, as well as many other bosses in the game. Now as for the bosses, they're still very much just Dark Souls bosses. If you explore around the map, you can find a lot of extra bosses. The visuals in this game are great. It's very atmospheric, with all of the gloomy levels and mystical levels and all in between. The visual art in this game is a treat. So here's a showing of a boss fight in Dark Souls 2. Overall, Dark Souls 2 had a lot of good things and things that just shouldn't have been in the game. I get what people say when they say that it's good as a game, but as a Dark Souls game, it's bad. Well, those are my thoughts on Dark Souls 2.